I'm Mary Susie from Bead Me a Story, and thanks so much for joining me today to learn the Mercury weave. So the Mercury weave is a really interesting weave. This is for intermediate chain mailers only. I think this would be a very, very hard one for a beginner to try and learn. Basically, what we're going to have is a center chain, and we're going to wrap components around that center chain. So chainmail components. This is a really pretty weave that looks a lot like Byzantine, but it's not something that I see anybody really doing out there. I've seen a couple of the masters do it, but there are no tutorials for this, and I haven't really seen too much documentation on it. So I wanted to experiment with it myself and kind of see what was going on with this weave. You know, why is that pretty weave not being used out there? So one of the things I found is that I think if you make this in a very standard size chainmail, which is usually like 18 gauge or 16 gauge jump rings, it's not super attractive. This is the little segment that we're going to make in this video. And of course, I've used, colors that just contrast, but you can see that there's a lot of bits hanging off the sides, and it just isn't all that usable in these standard sizes. But what I did was I put beads in between these lengths. I noticed that it would make great little tiny segments of chain lengths, so I've kind of used it that way with some beads in between. And then I also tried it in a micro version. I think this is a really attractive chain. I think this would work very nicely with a lot of other weaves. It's nice and small, and this would work into a necklace chain really well. And as you can see, anytime we can, kind of hang beads off of something easily, this would make great earrings too. So there are some great uses for this weave. I just don't think it's one that you just go, hey, I'm going to do Mercury weave and I'm just going to make a whole bracelet out of it. I don't think it would work very well for a bracelet. I think it's more suited to a necklace or earrings. And I think it's also more suited to either a micro size or a mixed media situation where you have, like I have here, beads set in between it to kind of compensate for the size that it becomes. So I really had a lot of fun working with this. It actually ended up to be a very usable weave after I just, made a couple alterations to it. And I hope you have a great time learning this. This is, again, for an intermediate chain mailer. You really need to have good handwork. You need to be very good with your non-dominant hand. You need to be able to hold on to the work very securely so that you can wrap other work around the outside. So because of that, this is an intermediate chain, and I think you'll have a great time learning to make it. It's pretty easy once you get the hang of it, but getting those first couple rows done is definitely going to be a challenge. So just make sure that you're focused and up to the task if you're going to try this out. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started making this chain. Here is Mercury. Okay, so to create Mercury weave, I have gone ahead and gotten our base ready to go. So as you can see, this is just a 1 by 1 by 1 by 1 chain. Okay, so just a single jump ring in each row of the chain. And then over here, you'll see that I created little chains of 3 jump rings in a row. So I alternated the color, and then you can see we have an open jump ring here. So basically how this chain is going to work out is it's going to look like there's a Byzantine weave, but it's actually going to be orbiting around the outside of this chain. So this is really a captive chain in the middle. And I just alternated the color. Keep in mind, I didn't choose these colors to be pretty. I chose these colors because they're high contrast. So I wanted you to really be able to see where everything was sitting as we put this together. Okay, so one of the biggest things you're going to learn with Mercury weave is that you have to have really good non-dominant hand skills. So for me, that's my left hand. That's my hand where I'm going to be holding everything. And I need my skills in this hand to be strong, okay, so that I can hold things and have them ready to go so that I can get jump rings through them. So basically what we're going to do, this contrasting color, I want you to keep in mind that I always start with an extra ring at the front. And this just makes it easier to get in there. I've got the paper clip attached to it. It's easier for me to get my hand in here and get it underneath these rings. So basically what I want to do is I'm going to pick up the little cluster of 3, and I want this to be turned the same way each time. So you notice I have the purple one, the middle one, on a down slope in order to bring it around the outside. So you'll see here right away why this is a challenging weave to do. And I'm going to start on the first gold. So that may leave me with a couple extras, but we'll see how this lands. And I just want to target in on that every other one. And this is going to need to sit between, you'll notice I'm fiddling already, it's got to sit between this gold and this sky blue ring. Okay, and you see how I can see the wings around the outside of this? Okay, so I'm holding this in place. You notice I have my thumb down. I'm holding this chain on top of this little chain of 3. And I always like to make sure that the end of this chain kind of flops over on the back of my hand so that it's out of the way. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to come up through one of these green wings, and then somehow we've got to get across and get through the other green wing of that 3-row chain. Okay, and then we're going to close. So if you remember, the center of my chain of 3 rings was lavender on the back side too. You're not necessarily seeing it right now, but now that I have this in place, I can show you. Okay, and this actually left 2 extras at the beginning. That's fine. I'm just saying, you know, leave a ring or 2 at the beginning because you could see how hard that was to get this around. I made it look easy, but this is a bit tricky to work out how to do it. It's a lot of, like I said, you really need strong hand skills with your non-dominant hand and how you hold rings to prepare them to move a ring through. Okay, so now we've done this first row. Now I want to make sure to do the same thing with the second. So I'm going to kind of let this sit behind. Remember, I have my purple one, my lavender in the back sloping down, and I'm letting the wings of this sit to either side. So I just laid this 1-by-1 chain on top of that chain of 3. Okay, and then I'm going to pick up, notice I'm using one of my fingers to kind of balance my jump ring. This just kind of helps me be able to pick it up where I want to pick it up instead of trying to pick it up off the mat. And then I'm going to pass through the green, and then I need it to come across and pass through the other green. Okay, and you have to make sure that you're doing this consistently. So that's why I wanted to point out about how the lavender in the row of 3 is sloping down, because we want this to sit the same way each time. See how we've still got our lavenders on the front and back, and then we have the green on the sides. Okay, and that lavender had sloped down. That's this one back here, because it had to come up over top of this matte sky blue ring. Okay, so let's do this a couple more times, and then we'll talk about this design and how it can be used. Okay, so I'm going to pick this up. Again, my lavender ring is sloping downward. I'm going to pick up the weave, or I'm sorry, I'm going to pick up the chain or the working chain. And again, I want this to sit kind of right behind that gold ring, but really we're using this groove that's between this matte gold and this sky blue to get this in place. And okay, so see how this flopped forward? So this is what I'm talking about, like folding this back, making sure it's sitting behind the work so it doesn't get in your way while you're trying to do this. And then I'm going to pass through the green and through the green again. So you'll notice these outside rows that I'm adding, we're never passing through any of the rows of the 1x1 chain. And that's what makes this weave a little bit of a challenge to do, because things shift around, things get a little wonky, and I definitely encourage you to practice this in this larger size before you go on and do anything else. Okay, so I have one more here. And again, I'm going to pick this up, making sure that my lavender ring is sloping downward. And I'm going to try and lay this behind this matte gold. Okay, make sure my length of my 1x1 chain is hanging towards the back so it's not in my way. I'll pick up the fourth ring of this little Byzantine section, or this little captured section, and this isn't going to work out for me this time because I didn't do my left hand properly, and I'm glad you got to see that, because honestly this was all going too well. You know, this has been a little bit of struggle to learn this chain, and I want you to realize this is an intermediate chain. This is not this is definitely not for a first-time beginner. This takes a little bit of hand skills to do this, and that's fine. We want to challenge ourselves. Okay, so up through the green, and then let's see if I can get across to the other. I can't do it again. So you're going to do quite a bit of this, and I'm glad you're getting to see this, that this last one is giving me some challenges, because I can assure you I didn't just sit down and do this instantly. I've done a little practicing before showing you how to do this. And it's all about getting this little chain of 3 laying just right on your fingers to where you can lay this other chain on top well. And I think I have it in good shape this time, so let's see. But I like you to know that I'm struggling with this too. See, I still didn't get it. Okay, now I have I'm pushing down a little bit more with my thumb. Let's see if we can get this. Okay, here we go. All right, and say I came across. All right, so these 4 rings are just sitting around the outside of this 1x1 chain in the center. They're not connected again in any way. Okay, so let me let you see this. Now, this is a weave that I haven't seen anybody do a tutorial for, and a lot of times when I see that happen, it makes me really question what was the problem with that weave. What were the challenges with this weave that, you know, I don't see everybody who does chain mail out there doing this chain. And I think the problem with this one is that, first of all, it doesn't look great in this size. It's just a little bulky. You have to think to yourself, does somebody want to wear a chain, you know, like this? Is this the size chain somebody would want to wear in a pattern that's like this? And I just think with all of these little wings hanging out to the sides that, you know, this could probably get caught on clothes a lot, or I don't know. It's just a little too bulky. I don't love it. Okay, so that made me want to go find ways to love this. Okay, so the first thing that I noticed about this chain that could make into something interesting is that you see how if we look at this gold and the sky blue and how this little piece wraps around it, you can see that that can easily be disconnected right here to just be little in between chain links. And I thought that was really interesting that we could have such a little piece and it would hold its shape and connect really well. So this is the first thing that I experimented with this chain. I really like it. And keep in mind, this is for those of you who want to stay in this 18 gauge size family. I don't think I'd go any larger than 18 gauge with this, although, you know, with large enough beads, you could potentially make this interesting. So this is what I decided to do with this particular chain in this size, in the 18 gauge size. So I'm going to take off this beginning stuff. I was just kind of practicing at the beginning, seeing where we would go with this. And so you can see that I have a bead. So this is an 8mm diameter bead. And these look, I think, really good in between these rows. They're large enough to carry the size. And, you know, the size proportion is always going to be really important when you're making chains, particularly necklace chains, to just, you know, keep everything looking like it was meant to be. Okay, so let me show you real quick how I'm doing this. I'm sure most people have an awesome bead stash already. If you don't, there's lots of great bead suppliers out there. So I'm just using an eye pin, and I put this onto the eye pin, and you'll notice that this loops around this way. So I want the other side to loop around the opposite way. So I'm going to turn this so that when I bend this wire, I'll bend it away from me. And you'll notice I'm using this really long head pin, but I'm just going to make several head pins out of this one long one. Okay, so I'm going to bend this to a 90-degree angle. Then I need to cut. Sorry, my cutters were a little out of range for me. And I try and kind of put my finger on the same place every time so I can kind of get a good idea of where to cut each time without having to get a ruler out. But I can always shorten this if I need to. So I'm going to leave that extra piece of wire over there. And then I'm going to take my Xuron round nose pliers and turn this towards me. These were really tiny loops on my eye pins. You won't always have that. A lot of times the loop will be a little bit bigger. So just try and mimic what you have. But that's basically all there is to this. And I'll show you with this extra piece of wire from this very long eye pin that I'm going to bend and make a loop before I start putting a bead on. Okay, nice little loop there. And then I will put my bead onto this. And let's see, my loop. I want my loop to be away from me. And I've tried a lot of ways with making loops. I'm the first to admit I'm not great at this, even though I've been doing it for years. But I did find that using one of the fine tip Xuron pliers really helped at bending this to 90 degrees. So these are the 450 BNs, or you could use the tweezer nose. Either one of those is going to get you that nice bend because it's so small it can really get in there. Okay. So again, I'll just, and these do not have to be perfect, I will mention. because we're going to cover up these loops. So just try and get them in the ballpark as far as size, but these don't have to be perfect. We're going to cover them up later. Okay, so here's my little beads that I'm working on. So basically, instead of having a 1 by 1 by 1 chain, a single chain, we're going to have the beads in between the rows as a little interruption in the row. Okay, so let me take these sky blue rings that I have sitting over here. Okay, so I connect one to the bead loop, and then I connect this through the other jump ring, and I add a new bead loop. And again, for this 18 gauge 3/16 inch jump ring size, an 8mm bead seems to be what's appropriate in size to make this chain. Okay, so there's one. Just going to do one more of these just so we have enough to work on here. These are some really pretty beads I had in my stash, all faceted. They're an abacus shape, but I think you would be fine if you had a round shape or, you know, kind of a round faceted cut. That's just fine. Okay. All right. So you see, this is not the 1 by 1 by 1 chain that we started out with this gold and sky blue and gold and sky blue. This is a bead and then 1 1, a bead and 1 1. But as I said, I could easily see that this could be broken down to make an interesting chain. So now what we're going to need is our little sets of 3 beads. Okay, so I'm sorry. So I said beads, but what I meant was jump rings, or set of 3 jump rings that we have here. So you can see I extended this chain a little bit, so we have a little bit more to work with. And I've got 2 jump rings between each set of beads. And then here are my little sets of 3, my little single chains of 3 jump rings. And then you see I have some open ones that'll make the 4th in this little grouping up here. Okay, so I just want to point out something. So you know how we're going to pick this up, okay, and we're going to make sure that our center ring of this little grouping is sloping downward and away from us. Okay, so when you look at that and decide on here which side we'll kind of be working on, you want to kind of mimic what happened in that previous row. Okay, so that means that my downslope is because of this one. So I want to basically look at this ring as the one that's running vertically. So in other words, if I went through the hole, it would be vertical. And this one is where I can see down through the center of the hole. So that's my horizontal one. Okay, and we kind of need to look at it that way so that we can approach this properly. Okay, and just like before, I'm gonna try and lay this little group of 3 in between. Notice I kind of, you know, did this motion of bringing it to the back so that it would be out of my way. I'm gonna pick up my ring, and there we go. Okay, so I went across and allowed this set of 4 rings now to surround the inside chain, which is now just 2 jump rings. Now I'm just working off of 2 jump rings. But that was really what I found was interesting about Mercury, was that it could make these little dimensional clusters for me. Okay, so again, sloping down in the center. And I'm going to try and get that in between those two rings. Really, it's sitting more behind the first one than the second one. And then we'll bring that across, okay? So again, this does take some practice to do. That's why this is an intermediate project, not a beginner project. Okay, there's another one. And so we will just keep going on and on. I think I'll do one more for you, and then I'll show you what else I'm going to do with this chain to really make it work well for myself. As far as being a solid construction. You know, people wear these a lot. They don't want it falling apart. Okay, so from outside to inside and inside to outside. It's another way of putting that. And we're just crossing. So this, you know, after a few tries, this gets really easy to make in this fairly large size of jump ring. It does take a little bit of practice, but once you get it, this does get easier and easier and easier to do the clusters in between. Now, I want to show you what else I'm doing. So you'll notice that I showed you how to do an eye pin, a looped eye pin. Now, typically, I would tell you if you were going to do a beaded chain, typically I would tell you stay away from eye pins. They can easily kind of open up. You know, they can get bent pretty easily, come off things. It's much better to have a wire wrap chain, a wire wrap eye pin than it is to have just a loop that could then open up. But what I like to do, and kind of a signature thing for me in my jewelry, is I like to create these little orbital sections over the top of the loop. So you can see here I have a brown and a silver jump ring, and those go over top of the loop. That way, if my loops are ugly, which they often are, then I can just kind of cover that up. I really actually did a pretty good job with my loops this time, but the other reason to do this is because it will prevent that loop from being able to open up. You know, it's just going to really secure that area, not allow anything to get underneath the end of that loop, and therefore give us a really nice secure chain that's not going to come apart. Okay, so I love this little orbital trick to keep everything in place. The other thing we're doing with this is I chose to use silver in this, and that's giving us that little spot of silver we need to make sure that when we add findings to this chain, even though I've done it all in blue and green, I've got that little touch of silver in there that's going to make the clasp kind of make sense when you see this whole piece together. Okay, so you can see this was the last one I did here. So just to kind of show you how to do this, I just let this come around, okay, the outside of that eye pin, and then I close. Okay, so I did that with brown, and now I'm going to do that with silver. Now you're going to choose whatever colors you want. You're going to see what you got in your bead stash, what pretty size 8 beads you have, what colors you have in the 18 gauge 3/16 jump rings. And then for this size, I'm using a 20 gauge 1/8 inch jump ring. But I will say that you could probably very effectively do this with 20 gauge 5/32 or with 18 or 19 gauge 5/32. So whatever you have in your stash, use that. Oops. Well, here I thought I was getting fancy getting these. These are great for wrapping it around. They are not great for me for closing the jump ring. So let me get more of my standard plier. I'm just more comfortable with a short with a short tip and not such a small tip, I can grab onto the jump ring a little bit better, but that's just my preference. Okay, so I'll do one more of these. I'm going to use this pair of pliers just to wrap it around. You can see this is so tiny, this plier, that it's really nice. It gets in there. Maybe if I use the flat plier over here on my left, this might work. Oh, there you go. That worked better. Okay, so you see you can switch your hands, which hand has the bent nose and which hand has the flat nose. Okay, and then I'm going to take this silver and wrap that jump ring just around, just going around the loop that's on the end of the bead. Not happy with that. I just wasn't getting a good grab on that jump ring, so let me switch these around again. Okay, so these are the orbitals that I'm going to add into this very pretty little chain that's happening here. And I'm just going to keep going with this, but I think you've seen enough to kind of see how to do this. Like I said, there's lots of options with these small orbital rings. Anything from a 20 gauge 1/8 or from a 1/8 inch ring to a 5/32 jump ring is going to work great for these little orbitals. So use what you have, or you know, if you're going to get some. My loops were very small. If you have a little bit larger loops on the end of your beads, then you probably want to move up to the 5/32 size, which would be the next size up from this. And then again, this whole chain here is made with 18 gauge 3/16 jump rings. So a nice size to work with, very easy for most people to work with, especially since we're attempting an intermediate chain. Okay, so that is my first idea, is just making little chain links with the Mercury chain to go with some beads that are going to provide some weight and that are going to be in line with this little cluster size wise. So that's why we're using 8mm wide bead, because it's going to you know, size wise balance out this chain. And then of course, to cover up our loops so that we don't have to do wire wrapping, we can just do eye pin loops, just basic loops on the ends. I'm going to cover up with the smaller jump rings and create little orbital stripes on either side of the beads to make this chain happen. Okay, so if you want to make that yourself, this is you know, this is something you can go to your bead supplies and see what beads you want to highlight, and this makes a gorgeous chain. And I don't feel like it's too big. I think it's a nice size that it is often worn by people. So you know, you just you know, unless you want to exaggerate something with very large or you're doing very small, I think this is a perfect happy medium, and anybody would wear this chain. And of course, this chain could be mixed in a mixed chain kind of scenario, or you could just make, you know, the entire chain out of this, and I think it would be beautiful. Okay, so now on to the micro size, which is another interesting way to use this weave. Okay, so this is the micro version of this chain. So I wanted to show you a little comparison of how small this one is. This is just slightly bigger than most of these, but as we all know, it's very hard to find a really nice, tiny little micro chain to do in chain mail. Jen's pin linkage works really well for that. That's probably the smallest one. But I've also found that I can do abstain and make a really nice little spiraling chain. So this is a little bit smaller than what you see here. You can see this is going to be a little bit wider. Next is, this is probably the best match in size, the closest. This is the barrel chain that's just above it. Okay, but you can just see how small this is. And then finally a Byzantine. I only had one handy that had rhinestones in it. So this Byzantine next to the Byzantine with rhinestones. But just think, if you did a Byzantine chain in between this chain, it'll work rather nicely because you have all these nice folded back jump rings that are going to look really good with it. So I just wanted you to see size wise that this is a nice small chain, and it has a lot of nice texture to it. So if you want to make creations where the chain changes, obviously I've got a different color here. I wanted you to see the contrast so you could keep in mind that the gunmetal one, but you can really mix and match your chains and do some very interesting things. So I wanted you to see how very tiny this chain is. It's not the smallest that we can do, but it does have a really nice texture in the micro size, and I think is very wearable as a necklace in the micro size. Okay, so I'll just show you a couple rows of this as I work it. So I want my I want to turn my chain this way. Now this stuff is going to twist around, so just make sure you're looking at the previous row that you did and making sure that that back one would be down and to the right. And then that way we can continue to keep adding these rows the same way we have been. So you can see that the center of the 3 rings is down and to the right. And as we put this chain on top of it, we'll see. Not sure if I have that perfect enough. So as you get smaller, this gets a little bit more fiddly to do, a little bit more challenging. But I think if you want a pure Mercury chain, this is the way to do it, is in the micro size. I just feel like it looks the best. Okay, so there's another row of that, and we're just going to keep going with additional rows of micro maille. Again, I make sure that my center ring is down, sloped down and to the right. Okay, and let's see how I lay my jump ring on my finger. Oh, I still didn't manage to grab that right. Here we go. Okay, through there and come across. Okay, so it is the same thing. I know it's a little bit harder to do it in the smaller. Whenever I teach, I always encourage people to try things in the more standard sizes first, get real comfortable with the weave, and then then go ahead and try it in a micro. Usually once you get comfortable doing a weave, then the micro is not going to be a big deal. Now this is a little bit more fiddly than most weaves because you're trying to surround the inside chain, and that means that my left hand is doing most of the work in this. So usually the non-dominant hand, yes, we need to get decent at picking things up, but most things aren't quite as challenging as surrounding this with another piece of chain maille. So this takes a little bit of practice to do, but it didn't take me long of practicing it before I jumped down to the micro size and was able to do this very comfortably. And I think this is a really beautiful chain in this size. And if you want to just do pure Mercury, that I really believe this is the way to do it. So a nice 20 gauge, 1/8 inch jump ring. The Mercury really does well with an aspect ratio of about 4. So that means we can use our 20 gauge, 1/8 inch jump rings. We can use our 18 gauge, 3/16 jump rings. And then if you want to go into 16 gauge, that would be a 1/4 inch for that. But as I said, I like this small, and I like the standard size with the beads so that we can add a little bit more interest and balance to the chain. And I really hope you've enjoyed learning to make this project. It is something that's going to be very easy for you to just, pull out some jump rings and start working on and see if you can do it. And it's a nice challenge. Plus, we don't do enough necklace chains, and I love when we can find little segments to add into things. This could also be, a pair of earrings. So you could see, just our bead and then the little segment, and then maybe something else dropped at the bottom. So as I said, I hope you enjoyed learning this. I hope it was very informative for you. Let me know what you think, and be sure to like and follow us on YouTube. I'll see you next time. Thanks so much.